So I'm very honored to present today a new form, Form A4a, on behalf of the Clinical Task Force. This form was designed to capture whether our research participants are receiving any AD-specific treatments that might affect their biomarker levels. These are my disclosures. I have served as a consultant on biomarker testing for AZI and Eli Lilly. So this form was really prompted by the proliferation of Alzheimer's disease specific treatments that may affect the variables we're studying at our ADRCs. And our participants may receive these treatments via multiple routes. So the first is as part of clinical care. So aducanumab received accelerated FDA approval in 2021, but it was never really widely used. But it did make us start to think about recording the use of these treatments clinically. And then on July 6, 2023, lecanemab received full FDA approval, and it is now in clinical use, including at WashU, but at many different centers. And we expect that an increasing number of our research participants will receive it in the coming years. Of course, there are additional AD-specific treatments, one of which may be approved within the year. And there's a quite significant pipeline of Alzheimer's disease specific treatments shown here on the right from the Jeffrey Cummings paper. So this is really good news, I think, generally. But it does mean that we need to keep track of these things in ways that we didn't have to before. In 2024, there were 127 different agents and 164 AD clinical trials. Some of these treatments have major effects on ADRD biomarkers, including biomarkers of amyloid. These current trials require a lot of participants, estimated 51,000 this year. And those participants include some of the participants that are enrolled at our ADRCs. So why do we need a new form? That's probably obvious, but we need to keep track of our participants who are taking these treatments that could affect their biomarkers, could affect their cognitive performance, all kinds of different things, but just generally confound our analyses. And in the past, before this form, we had no uniform mechanism to identify participants who were receiving these treatments. Of course, we've been doing trials on these treatments for a long time, but there was not one form to keep track of this. Now, initially, we thought about including this kind of information in our medication form, but we concluded that this was not the best way to do this. The reason for this is that the medication form is really a snapshot that records the medications that a participant is taking at the time of the clinical assessment. But it could miss transient treatment. So, for example, if a participant received lecanemab for 6 months in between study visits, but they weren't taking it at the time of a study visit, then it wouldn't be recorded. But 6 months of lecanemab could certainly affect their biomarker levels. So we think that we need to do something other than our medication form. Also, the medication form was never designed to capture participation in clinical trials, especially in the circumstance when participants don't know whether they're receiving the treatment or a placebo, and the medication form doesn't capture any effects related to treatment, such as ARIA, that could affect ADRD biomarkers. Another reason that we thought was reasonable for making a completely new form is that these treatments and trials are really rapidly evolving, really over the course of months to a couple of years. And if we had a separate form, that could provide us with a lot more flexibility to change the form as needed. So the process for creating the form was a lot of discussions. Some of the key considerations were we didn't want to make this a major burden on participants and centers. Also, there were some issues related to respecting contracts with pharmaceutical companies. In some cases, you're not allowed to record really detailed data if a participant's enrolled in a clinical trial. We also wanted to align our form with other constructs like the CADRO classification. And we wanted to have flexibility, as I mentioned, because we expect things are going to keep changing. A subgroup of us met and generated a first draft. This was reviewed by the clinical measures and diagnosis work group that made further changes. And then we elicited feedback from all the centers and incorporated this into a revised draft. One note before I go through the form is we decided that the primary function is going to be to identify individuals, basically flag them. And flag in these individuals who may have analyses that are confounded by AD-specific treatments. This form is not intended to provide detailed information to try to figure out whether these AD-specific treatments are working. We're leaving that to the clinical trial itself or other research studies at the individual centers. But that's not what we were envisioning as a purpose of this form. So the form starts with instructions and states that the form is to be used to record treatments known to significantly impact Alzheimer's disease and related dementia's biomarkers, whether received as part of a clinical, clinical care or a clinical trial. And then if a participant is receiving one of these treatments as part of their clinical care at the time of the clinical assessment, that it should also be on the medication form. So if you're getting it when you come in for your assessment, it should be in both places, both on the A4a as well as the plain old medication form. We also think it's important to include participation in any ADRD drug trial over the individual's lifetime. That may be hard if the trial was a long time ago, but we would encourage people to try to include everything. If available, we would suggest that the clinicaltrials.gov identifier be entered into the appropriate cell. And hopefully you can help the participant look this up if they don't know what it is. We'll basically take whatever information you can give us, but the more information we get, the more informative this will be. You can enter this number into Google search and find these numbers. And also we refer, as part of the instructions, people to the Cummings paper to get information about the classification of the drug type and other information. However, we generally would like this form to be completed based on the participant interview and or co-participant report, keeping in mind that you may need to do a little bit of work to find some of these numbers. So I'll go through the form now. Question 1 is very simple. Has a participant ever been prescribed or been enrolled in a clinical trial of a treatment expected to modify ADRD biomarkers? Yes, no, or unknown. So we expect that for the vast majority of our research participants, that the answer is going to be no, and then the form ends, so you're done. But if the answer is yes, you go to question 2. And this has really a bunch of sub-questions in it. This is where you should try to find out what drug it is, if they can tell you what class it is in. Again, this is reflecting the CADRO classification, and you can find it in that Cummings paper. And then if they're in ALZNet, there's a place to enter the ALZNet number. There's a start and end date for treatments. We did not think it was reasonable to ask people to put in all the dates of individual infusions. That was just too burdensome. So we just have a start and end date. And then how was the treatment provided? Was it provided as part of clinical care, clinical trial, or in some cases, it might be both. And then in some cases, the research participant will know whether they receive the active treatment or the placebo. In some cases, they're blinded and they won't know. Again, we just ask that you insert as much information as you can. Again, we expect that the major goal of this form is just going to be to flag people who may have confounds due to treatment with these drugs. Question number 3, has a participant ever experienced amyloid-related imaging abnormalities, either ARIA-E or ARIA-H or other major adverse events? Yes, no, or unknown, and if so, we ask what those are. We're not going after infusion reactions here unless it was anaphylaxis or something like that. We are trying to find out if people have ARIA-E or ARIA-H because that might affect their MRI or other measures. And that's it. That's the whole form. As I've emphasized, the major use is to flag people, and it's possible that the needs of this form may change over time, especially if new drugs are approved, or if we decide we want to add a bunch more variables, if people think that's worthwhile to do. If a larger than current percentage of our research participants start taking these treatments, then that might elicit us to want to add more details to the form. But we'll have to see. Again, things continue to change rapidly. So I'd like to thank everyone that helped with drafting this form and reviewing it. Special thanks to Greg Jica, Jeff Burns, Teresa Gomez Isla, and Nina Silverberg, who were all quite instrumental in helping to develop this form. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Suzanne. There's some in the questions in the chat trying to clarify about the end date, if that's supposed to be the last date the patient received the treatment.
Yeah, so the end date would be the last date that they received the treatment. So if they're currently on the treatment, it would be the date of their last infusion, for example. If they stopped the treatment several years ago, then you would have that as the last date.
I think there was some discussion about if the treatment or trial is ongoing, that we would put in like a informative missing 888 code. And we haven't yet put that on the form, but we will be adding that.
Thank you, Jessica. I think the next question from Dr. Johnson, it may mean that we need to clarify the instructions. So she's asking you if a clinic patient's receiving lecanemab as part of a clinical care, not clinical trial, then the answer to number 1 would be no. The form ends there. It actually reads, has the participant ever been prescribed a treatment or been enrolled in a clinical trial? So I think we probably need to clarify that wording just to emphasize that it could be prescribed a treatment as part of clinical care or been part of a clinical trial. So I think
yes, that's correct. It's either or. We're trying to capture any treatment, whether it's part of clinical, received as part of clinical care or a clinical trial.
The question for follow-up visits, what do we do with this form if nothing's changed since the previous visit? So I assume, go ahead. Yeah.
I think you would just record the information that was on the previous form. I'm not sure if we decided to bring the information forward on this particular form.
Yes, this is one of the forms that I have on the list of values that will be carried forward. So it would be like the A4 medication form where it would carry the values forward, you review it, and if anything changed, you update it. If not, then you just keep what was there.
And the next question's on if somebody goes from blinded to open label, like as part of a clinical trial, if they'll need to have a new form submitted or to submit 2 forms because they might be on kind of both that clinical trial aspect and the open label.
So participants are going to be completing this when they come in for their research visit. So so they would just answer the question with the new information. So I don't think that, I'm not sure if they're asking if you would send a form in between visits, but basically you're just, at each visit, you record the information, the most relevant, most up-to-date information you have at that time. So in that case, if they come in, you know, a year ago and the answer is, I don't know whether I'm on the treatment, that's what the form would say. And then if they became unblinded, then that would, then the next form, you would just check that you are on treatment.
And then maybe if they've moved to the open label part, we can probably provide some more clarification in the guidebook about maybe calling that active treatment too, since they'll be on active treatment at that point.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Like an open label extension, going from to open label extension. Yeah, no, that's a good thing to add to the instructions. And I think this question actually came up early. How much time do you expect these new forms to take for your speedy providers and then your slowest providers? So this form should be very short, because for most people, the answer is going to be no. So it's going to be answering one question. For individuals who have been in multiple clinical trials, obviously that's going to take longer. In terms of speedy providers or slowest providers, probably the biggest factor here is going to be how much the research participant knows about the studies. And if you're Googling to find out what the numbers are, that will obviously take longer. Again, I think that's going to be a minority of our research participants where that's an issue. And if people don't know the answer, that's okay. They're still flagged. We still know that they've received something. And so presumably when people analyze that data, they can either keep those flagged individuals or exclude them from analyses. All right, any other questions?
It doesn't appear so.
All right. Oh, are there going to be unknown codes? I think that we have in the form, you know, that we've been through a couple of versions recently for REDCap, but I think there's
we have unknown as an option there.
Yeah.
Oh, if somebody can't remember the dates, I think that's what Jessica we're alluding to, that we'll add that on there. Is that right? If they don't have a known, if they're ongoing or if they don't know the dates.
That was just if they were ongoing, but we can certainly add, you know, if they don't know the dates, we can add another missing code for that too.
Thank you. Questions? All right, and then the question about will the UDS forms be finalized for IRB submission? So again, except for these few typos we've noted, they should be ready, correct, for IRB submission. It's really just going to be the code book, the guidebook that's going to be, that we'll be refining chiefly. And that's not patient facing, that's for investigators and research teams. So really beside these few typos, word clarifications, I think we should be ready. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think so. We finalized the packet a couple weeks ago. There are a couple things that have changed, like mostly just smaller typos or things we talked about today. A4 and A4a were previously not required and now are required as of the meeting before the ADRC meeting. So those things are not currently reflected in the pilot form packet because we just couldn't make any more changes at that point, but they will be updated for the release of the actual UDS4.
There's a question about whether this form should be filled out by the clinician or clinical research staff. I'm just trying to see, I don't think we specify.
Yeah, I think it could depend on the center. Yeah, I think that probably either could do that.
Yeah, we'll clarify, but it seems like we'd be able to have the research staff gather that information. If there's need clarification, they can go to the clinician just to clarify.
Yeah, I would imagine if the answer is no, I mean, that's very simple. But if the research participant had been in 4 prior clinical trials, then they might need a little more assistance filling it out.